as the introduction stated, today we have the wonderful opportunity to not only spend a little bit of time with Carole Diarra, who's got a fantastic background and want to reach into that a little bit, but also learn more about such an iconic brand and something that I certainly have watched over the years evolve in UGG. So I'm super excited to spend a bit of time with you, Carole, but also to learn more about what you have in mind for UGG. What's happening with the business has obviously evolved over the years, and really interested to see what you were thinking about the evolution of the brand and what you're planning for the brand. But first, I'd really love to get into your background a little bit, because you've made a pretty significant jump when you came over to UGG. So I'd like to understand a little bit of your background in L'Oreal, how that more traditional CPG training impacted you, affected you, and how you're taking that and starting to leverage that as you've taken this great jump over to UGG. And I'd also love to know a little bit about your background too, because as we got to know each other last week, your living situation's kind of unique. So I'd love some backstory on that too for the audience, if you're comfortable with that.
Okay, great. A lot to jump in then. So let's see. I'll start with my background. Well, I'll start with where I am. So I'm currently living in Paris, which is really exciting. I've been here for about a year and a half. This is my second time living in Paris. I lived here almost 12 years ago when I was with L'Oreal at the time, and I ended up marrying my husband, who is French, and we moved back with our two kids. So I have a daughter who's 7.5 and a son who's 5, and we moved back at the beginning of January 2021. And so it's been a fantastic opportunity to be back in Paris, but it's created a rather interesting work situation, as we talked about last week. So I'll show just a little bit about that. So in general, as I mentioned, I started my career in marketing in L'Oreal many years ago, over 20 years ago. And I started in the New York office, and it was really just a fantastic time for the company. You know, we were on a mission at that time to become the #1 beauty company worldwide. And our CEO at the time, Jean-Paul Agon, just presented a fantastic vision of how beauty could shape and move the world. And I was really excited because I loved consumers. I loved how people thought about their physical needs, which are functional, as well as their emotional needs. And that's what really excited me about beauty, is that there's always this combination of both. Yeah. And then there's also this element of infinite innovation, and there's always so much going on. So as I enjoyed my career at L'Oreal over 20 years, it took me to Paris for 5 years for the first time, while I got to work in our global headquarters in Paris when I was on the Garnier brand and what we call the DMI, which is our Direction Marketing International, which was really an exciting time because I got to work across so many of the countries around the world in which Garnier was present, understanding consumers, digging into those insights, and understanding how markets are really different around the world, and how do you build a global hierarchy of a brand, global brand strategy, at the same time make it locally relevant. And all of those experiences really, you know, have paid off and prepared me throughout my career. So as I worked on a global marketing career, I then came back to the US and headed up what we called regional innovation at the time. I was working for Garnier, and it was marketing, and I was working on Fructis and creating new lines of hair care. I worked on Olia, which was a new hair color brand. I worked on Fructis Style. So I got to work across a number of different product innovations during my time there, before I eventually had moved over to Garnier Skincare, stayed there for a few years, and then Vichy. I moved over and I was the head of Vichy for the USA, which was really an exciting brand. It was really when digital innovation was hitting. And so a lot of our marketing efforts were focused on leading influencers who were what we called kind of career moms who were obsessed with skincare. And so that was really an exciting time. I continued on my journey until I eventually left and became the CMO for Arbonne. And right. Arbonne was very interesting because it was a company focused on social selling, but also in the skincare and nutrition space. So that's what I was doing right before I moved to Paris. And because of the pandemic and life situations, my husband was French and I was in the US. We ended up deciding to move to France to be together. And he took another opportunity with Facebook at the time. So that landed me in Paris and trying to figure out my next steps and my next move. And I got a wonderful call about UGG, and I was immediately excited because it's a brand that obviously I had strong nostalgic sentiment for. So I had
Right.
my first pair of UGG boots when I was in business school in Boston, and I was a small town girl from South Carolina. Found myself in Boston, and it was freezing. And I bought my first pair of UGG boots at that time, and they really lasted me throughout my career. And so even as I moved to Paris many years afterwards, I still had those UGG boots. So when I got the call, I thought, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. It's a brand that I love, that I have a personal connection to. And like you said, it's had so many evolutions. It's had so
Right.
many wonderful evolutions in which they've continued to make the brand relevant with new product innovations, as well as leaning on digital and social. So at the time when I got the call, UGG was all over TikTok for a new pair of fluff, slippers that they had launched, and all the influencers was just raving about it. And so I was really excited about it. And the more I learned about the brand and the path that it was really on to renew itself for this generation of consumers and be more relevant and lean into purpose and sustainability, I thought, wow, this is different for me, but what an exciting opportunity. Just a great chance to take such an iconic brand and help to evolve it for the next generation of consumers. And so that's how I joined UGG. And so I've been there for about a year and a half. And actually, it's been 1 year coming up. It's not even a whole year and a half. It's
So
been
let's talk about that. Is a year and is a classically trained CPG beauty professional, right? With some pretty significant, if not market leading resources at L'Oreal. What do you do when you come in? How are you thinking when you come into a new role of head of marketing at UGG when it doesn't have the breadth of the notoriety? I'm at least not globally. That you're going to get with a L'Oreal. What walk me through the first, second, third things that you were focused on to make sure that you got up to speed as quickly as possible and you could start putting some plans together.
Mhm. Yeah, for me, it was really important to understand the industry and the culture. I think that's the first thing when you come into a new organization and a new industry, right? So I had spent so much time in beauty, so I knew all the players and I knew all the brands, and
Right.
it was second nature. And so coming into a business like UGG, where it's really footwear, that's trying to make a strong pivot into fashion and lifestyle. It's really understanding kind of the dynamics of the industry. Who are the key players? What are the key drivers? But all the things that I would traditionally do in my previous role, right? It was really understanding who are the competitors, what are their key kind of drivers, and then who are the consumers and what are they looking for across the space, right? So not only for our brand, but across the industry. And then just understanding the organization in terms of the resources and the capabilities. We are a part of a larger, I would say, conglomerate, similar to L'Oreal. When I worked on different brands, we're a part of the Deckers family. So leaning into Deckers and understanding what they bring in terms of their center of excellence were the most important things. So all the things that you would traditionally do in terms of understanding the lay of the land, I think were really important. So as I came into it, it was assessing those consumers. That's one of the first things that I did. The brand had not had a global brand audit in a while. They had done it a few years ago, but we needed to really update that, especially coming out of the crisis in which we had made such a huge jump during the crisis and during the pandemic. We really wanted to assess around the world, 8 different markets. We talked to over 12,000 consumers to understand what's the perception, like you said, of UGG around the world. So that was one of the first things that I did to really understand what are the truths about the brand? What are those brand truths? What do they mean? And where's UGG positioned in the consumer's mind today? So that's
What'd you
very much
find?
for my,
Tell,
yeah,
tell
so
us
that's
what you
very,
found.
Okay, definitely. So I was just going to say that's very much from my CPG training, right?
Right.
Is to like understand your consumers and where you're positioned today. So we discovered that UGG really had four brand truths that were universal pretty much around the world, slight nuances in different countries. But the first is that the brand really is known as comfortable, right? As you can imagine,
Yeah.
people love it. The way it feels, the sensorial, tactile element of it is really deeply rooted in the consumer's mind, and that's really true. Second is that the brand overall has a very relaxed and almost intimate feel. So people really are attached to it and they love it. And there's a strong sense of kind of the brand makes you feel relaxed, it calms you down. There's a sense of security around the brand. The third thing was really this idea that the comfort extends more than just the physical element. It's a brand that has emotional resonance in which it makes people feel good on the inside. And that's really this idea that I feel comfortable outside, but I feel comfortable inside. And that's really a sense of power when it comes to expressing yourself, when it comes to being free, when it comes to really, living your own truth and being authentic. Uh, so that was a great finding. And I think just showing how the brand could extend itself in that way. And then the third thing, which was definitely the most true in North America and gave us a big opportunity global, is that it really is starting to be seen as a player in the lifestyle and fashion world, and that they think that the brand is up to date on key issues, that the brand is up to date on key styles and trends, and they're really making moves to be more thoughtful about how they're positioned in the world around purpose and around fashion. So all great learnings for the brand and things that we're all able to build on as we look into the future for the brand.
Can we talk about that for a second? When you talk about a fashion influencer and up to date on the key issues, what's the position of the company around making claims or standing up for issues that are outside of, warm, comfortable, high quality apparel? I haven't seen as much from UGG. Not that I'm an expert on UGG, but it's certainly a place for culturally significant brands to make a stance or make a state. Let's not say a stance. Let's say a statement. And is that something that's actively discussed at UGG, whether that's supporting a position or supporting a person, or is that something that's intentionally you guys want to make sure that you're that you're delicate around that, just given the polarity that's happening in society at large right now?
Yeah, what a great question. For us, it's really about supporting our community, and it's
Right.
about supporting the community of people that love the brand, that are attached to the brand. And we also really focus on radical inclusivity, this idea that everybody should be able to come to the brand and see themselves and feel a part of the brand. And for example, we've always been a big supporter of the gay and lesbian community. And so for us, when we had Pride this year, for example, with the LGBTA plus community, we focused on making sure that we were at service to the community and we
Right.
were doing things that were in support of them. For example, we launched a campaign which is called Feel Heard. And as a part of this campaign,
I like that.
it was about welcoming all people to express themselves, but we also donated back to the Trevor Foundation so that we could provide mental health services for the community at large. And so we did that in the US. We also did that in Europe through a partner there. And we were able to even have an event in our flagship store in which we invited Laverne Cox to the store. And she shared a bit about her experience, what it has been to go through her transition. And so for us, it's really about supporting our community and allowing them to feel represented in all of our work and to feel heard in terms of their voice and be of service. So those are some examples of things that we're doing that lean in to purpose and inclusivity.
And is that going to be an ongoing effort for you guys? The concept of feel heard and because the tactile aspect of UGG, right? It is I wouldn't call it unique, but it's certainly an element that is part of the brand. And the dual meaning of that back to the emotional side of being a feeling. That's super smart, by the way. But is that something that's going to be a campaign for you guys? Are you seeing that continuing and pushing it forward? Okay.
Definitely. That's one of the key central truths of the brand, right? So as you think about what we're going to be leaning into, we have to take those consumer insights, which are really seen of truths for the brand, and elevate them and augment them and leverage them. So you will be seeing a new campaign that's all about the feeling of UGG. And what does that really mean? It's about being
Yeah.
able to express yourself in the most authentic way. So that will be a key part of our autumn winter 22 campaign, which will probably live on for the next year or so.
Okay, because I think that element of you know, and in that way it moves beyond shoes. It moves more towards the emotional connection, and obviously, big brands are fantastic at doing that. And that certainly seems like a platform in which people can transfer the physical element of the product to the emotional feeling that it provides. And that's when brands are brilliant, is being able to understand that and then deliver it in different ways. So that's actually, I'm looking forward to seeing that as Feel Heard continues to grow. It's a super smart idea. So let's talk about that a little bit then. As you know, you spoke a little bit about the culture aspect of it. Can you talk a little bit more about the communities and how you've thought about this segmenting of your global audit? Did that pull back into sort of 4 or 5 key segments that you guys are focused on? Is there personas that were developed? How do you activate against such a large initiative in a way that makes people feel it's personal to them while still being appropriate for a brand that so many people love, like UGGs? Like, how are you compartmentalizing that audit to activate on it beyond what you just described with Feel Heard?
Absolutely. So the first part of the work that we did from a consumer perspective was the global audit and really just assessing where the brand is and what are the strengths and weaknesses of the brand and what are some of the truths today. And then obviously we set an aspiration in terms of what are the things that we want to go to in the future. So the second and the third part of the work, I would say part 2, is really refining that brand strategy and articulating exactly who our design target is. And when we say a design target, we really mean that kind of bullseye customer that we think really is the true customer for UGG. And that's where we're in the middle of shaping that. We have a hypothesis given the qualitative and quantitative work that we launched around segmentation, but it's not quite ready to be rolled out. But there are these communities of people that really see themselves as representative of the UGG community, in which they are able to be, I would say, leaders in their community related to culture, related to fashion, related to arts, related to music. They really are at the pulse of what's going on. And they love to kind of take style, take expressions of themselves and make it their own. They're constantly looking for inspiration. They're constantly looking for discovery. And so this consumer, which we are still in the process of, I would say, refining, really is someone that we feel has a strong affinity to UGG, and they will be the consumer that will lean into for the future. Now, will we have other segments of people that we still speak to in terms of key customers? Absolutely. But we're kind of really honing our efforts on what's that key consumer who really see as the ultimate, what we call a design target for UGG. So over the next, I would say, few months, we'll be finishing up our segmentation and really kind of organizing them around personas, as you mentioned, and really articulating that through our brand strategy.
And this community that you would call a design target, are you observing from afar as far as behaviorally and sort of culturally what they're doing, or are you actually engaging them and bringing them into a council or some form of feedback loop where you're talking to them specifically and consistently over time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a key part of it. So we observed their behavior. We obviously took a large set of data from a
Yeah.
lot of disparate pieces of data. We did a full quantitative analysis for segmentation. And now the next phase of that will be this ongoing dialogue, just like you said, in terms of having continuous loop of feedback. And that will be a key part of how we will be threading the consumer in the heart of everything we do. And lot of what I think is so true of brands now is the need to be consumer obsessed, and really the need to have your consumer, the heart of all of your work kind of centered around them, around their likes, their desires, their aspirations, their dreams. And that's very much where the UGG brand is going.
I hadn't thought about this when we talked last week, but as you're looking at this design target, and you're learning about how they're going to be more innovative, they're going to be more cultural forward. If you would share, is there other lifestyle brands that sit inside this design targets realm that they speak of, or they reference, or they compare to? Obviously, it doesn't have to be apparel ones if you don't want, but they obviously have other brands, like, because I think that'll help this audience, because I've got a lot of UGGs in my house, right? I've got 5 people in my family, both genders, everybody has a pair of UGGs, but primarily it's footwear, right? Like there's a little bit towards non-footwear with one of my daughters, but not a lot. So without giving it all away, right? How does it frame from a brand experience? If you could reference other brands that these design leaders speak of or reference towards, can you share some of that to kind of help us understand how these brand leaders are thinking and engaging other brands?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to really say any couple of brands, because you look at them, there's several brands and they're all through different countries, right? Like, I mean, I'm sorry, they're all different through different countries. So, right. So when we talk about this design target, we're looking for commonalities at the global level, right? And so
Okay.
as we think about these cultural creators in the US, they might have a certain set of brands. In Japan, those same cultural creators might have a different set of brands. In China, similarly. So it's hard for me to really give you kind of one or two definitive brands,
Right.
especially that really compete with UGG, because one of the key things is that, that's fantastic about this brand is anytime you ask somebody what or who do you see as a competitor to UGG, most people cannot define a key
Yeah, it's
competitor.
tough. It's
Yeah,
tough.
it's really tough. It's like UGG kind of sits almost in a category of its own.
Yeah.
And you might have other shoes, you might have other boots, you might have other things in your wardrobe, but none of them are truly identified or seen as an alternative to a
Right.
pair of UGG boots. So in many ways, I'd love to give you, kind of a bullseye and say, well, this is the consumer, and this is, these are key competitors that we are looking at as the cultural creator. It's really hard for me to do that because we don't have those, and like I said, they're slightly nuanced by country, and I mean, obviously, if you think about brands that are doing well in culture overall, they're going to be brands like Balenciaga and Gucci. They're going to be brands like New Balance and Nike that are doing
Right.
things in the zeitgeist of culture in general.
Yeah.
But that would be almost an overstatement if I said, okay, those are the definitive brands of our cultural creator. It's a little bit more nuanced than that.
Yeah, and it's like also it's UGGs. It's the comfort of indoor slippers in an outdoor or out of home format, right? So it is. I don't know the space as well, but it certainly was when it came on the scene years and years ago. It was the comfort of being inside but walking outside or being outside, right? And that
Yeah.
hadn't been done before because it was always just was different. You didn't have that degree of comfort as you walked through the grocery store, right? It just didn't exist. So it certainly is a brand in and of itself, and from that standpoint.
Absolutely.
So let's push on that a little bit more. You spoke about international, and I didn't ask you earlier. Personally, I would have thought domestic would have been pretty darn significant, but what is the split? If you can share that, what is your split of US, non-US, or even split by geography or country would be cool, just so everyone knows how global UGG really is.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is a global brand. The US is still our largest market. However, we have a very significant presence in EMEA, which is in Europe, as well as in our APAC region. So primarily Japan, China, and Korea. And then in Europe, it's primarily the UK, France, Germany, Italy is also a growing market for us. And so we really see opportunities in all of those markets to extend both the awareness and the consideration. Because when we look at the map, like while we have presence in a lot of those countries, we still have, a big gap on awareness. So in the US, we have the highest awareness. So, as you can imagine, many people, when you say UGG, they immediately have
Yeah.
heard of it and they recognize it within North America. Within the UK, that's also pretty true. However, in our other markets where we also have a very strong consideration, we have more room to grow on awareness. And so a lot of what we're doing is how do we extend awareness now that we're leaning in on those core values, we're leaning in on that design target. How do we amplify the awareness and consideration for the brand in these international markets?
And you mentioned the DMI center at L'Oreal earlier. Is because
Mhm.
that was that centered on the same sort of thing of how do you take a global brand and make sure that it's positioned and then marketed appropriately by country or geography?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of what I learned there, I think, is 100% relevant to building global brand equity at UGG.
Yeah, because it's having worked, I worked at Colgate and I worked at Levi's, and it's the same sort of thing as you go into different geographies, especially with a brand like Colgate. It can mean something completely different in Latin America than it does in the US or in Europe. So it's that walk me through that. How are you balancing that? Are you over concentrating on markets where you see significant opportunity or you see significant growth? And I would imagine in some markets you're going to stay with your established positioning, your established products in order to get the right degree of awareness and perhaps repeat before you move into other product lines. You're doing that by the different countries that you mentioned, and
Mhm.
you're supporting that globally. Like that's a big, okay. So that's where it's helpful to have a resource like Deckers or something behind you to get the right foundation behind something so big. Like those are big, that's ambitious.
Yeah, I mean it's a big brand, it's about 2 billion worldwide. So, it definitely is, it's a brand with a fair amount of complexity. The maturity of the countries are all at different levels in terms of where they
Right.
are with UGG. However, like I said, we have such a clear foundation in terms of what the UGG brand stands for. We're using that to first clarify the brand strategy. And then as we go into each of these key markets, we'll be unlocking kind of what are the key levers of growth in each of those markets, right? So for a market like Germany, for example, that market really has, a huge opportunity on awareness for UGG. And here it's really about the practicality, the craftsmanship.
Right.
We have fantastic boots with natural materials that last a very long time. So telling that story through that lens of quality and craftsmanship are very important, while at the same time speaking to communities in Berlin about fashion and being more relevant in that space. Whereas in, for example, a market like France, it's leaning maybe even more into those fashion elements, and it's leaning even more into collaborations with key designers. It's leaning even more into social influencers that are really big in terms of having a credible following, and giving those high stakes occasions for UGG, right? And so the idea really is that we've evolved past a brand that has, where it was in the 90s, in which it was, had become maybe a bit less kind of those high stakes occasions. And now it really is a brand that you can wear on all occasions. People are wearing, them, for events. I went to Paris Fashion Week last year, and one of the attendees had a pair of UGG fluff slippers on, and I was like,
Awesome.
yes, exactly, yeah. So things like that are really where we have to think about the nuances of each market and
Right.
how do we make sure that the brand is showing up in the most relevant way for those audiences.
Yeah, and it's having worked on sort of global equities like that. It's almost, and it's important. It gets back to how you've identified those core brand attributes, and it's just how do you spin the knobs on the different geographies based on where the brand is and where it can go? Because a lot of that, to very opening point is what's the competitive set that that brand is competing in that
Yeah,
geography, and that's different from Germany to France.
that's
So your
right.
knob turning has got to be a little bit different
A
based
little
on,
different.
yeah, and it's, if you set that and you get your measurements in a good spot, then it's it can be fun. It's just a lot of work. It's doing all those countries at once. It's a lot of work.
Well,
But
we
obviously
have.
with an equity like UGG, you can cut through if you get your knob turning just right.
That's right. And we have fantastic teams in each of the regions. So,
Yeah.
and the global teams, we're working on setting the direction and making sure that we have, like you said, those equities nailed down, the brand strategy, the global targets, the customer segmentation. And then we have fantastic teams in each of the regions who are really making sure, like you said, that those nuances are
Yeah.
really captured, right? So it's the whole global idea, right? So globally driven, but locally relevant.
So I want to be sensitive to time, and there was something else we touched on that I want to make sure we talk about. And you mentioned it in the open. Obviously, COVID created a lot of different activities with regards to how things were consumed, how were they shopped for, how were they purchased. How did that impact UGG in the world of physical, right? Because you guys came up through selling your product through other people's venues in normal retail. And over time, like everybody, right? I'm sure UGG wants to use D2C or at least the digital connection platform to be more engaged directly versus having to go through a retailer.
Mhm.
Walk us through how you guys what you experienced during the core of the COVID push over the last 2 years, and what are
Mhm.
your ambitions now on the other side, where I would imagine you've gotten closer to your consumer because of COVID, and how you're seeing sort of the digital direct engagement versus the super important physical retail engagement.
Mhm.
How do you see those two things working together over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, you brought up a really great point that it really is this ecosystem that has to be balanced up and down across the different touch points. So I would say as an omni-channel brand, all the channels are really important, right? And so
Yeah.
whether we're gaining customers through our traditional retail environments, which are not our own stores. Those are just as important. Those customers are really important. But like you said, during COVID, when a lot of those traditional retail outlets had to be closed, we saw a big acceleration in our own e-commerce business. Now, luckily, and I wasn't there, so I can't take the credit, the e-commerce teams had done a fantastic job of preparing and had already had a very strong, sizable e-commerce business. And so when the stores were closed, we were able to very quickly lean into those capabilities, including omni-channel capabilities. And, our business grew significantly during this time, largely because people were locked inside
Shopping.
and not only shopping, but the whole 7 mile, I mean, this whole 2 mile trend really took off in which people could,
Yeah.
dress only to go in a 2 mile radius. So the fluffiest slippers really took off at that
Yep.
time for UGG. And so we saw an acceleration of our business, especially on the slipper side. And our e-commerce business was really able to scale up with this influx of demand. So we saw a huge move to our e-commerce business. And then simultaneously, as things started to open up, we opened up a flagship, one of our first flagship stores in New York City around the same time as COVID. So we had this interesting dynamic in which we opened up a new flagship store, which showcased a lot of our apparel and our lifestyle offering, as well as kind of the influx and growth from our slipper business. So for us, we had a lot of new learnings to lean on and grow. So we saw our D2C business overall grow significantly during this time period. And since then, we're still seeing a very strong, healthy business, especially from our D2C business. And what we're planning to do is to really make sure that those businesses continue to amplify and support each other. And we know now consumers obviously still really value the physical store. They use it for discovery, they use it for try-ons, they use it for returns, they use it for all kinds of services, information, education. to help enhance their overall experience, but they're not seen as so channel, I would say siloed, right? They're really
Right.
seen as an ecosystem in which the consumer is moving fluidly back and forth. They want to know that as a brand, you're supporting them wherever they shop. And
Yeah, and there's a
so
degree of consistency there. Yeah,
that's
versus online's just for replenishment and the
right.
stores for exploration and new product
Yeah,
purchase, right? I totally agree with that. It needs to be more uniformly
that's right.
treated.
That's right. And a fluidity back and forth. So the consumer wants
Totally.
to know that you understand them no matter where they're shopping, and you're able to have that information at your fingertips. And so that's one of the key things that I think on the back end that we're working towards, just to make sure that that omni experience is strong. And as a part of our consumer obsession initiative, really to lean in on this idea of putting the consumers first and making sure that we service them and delight them with experiences. And I shared a little bit about this when we talked, which is this idea of digital
Yeah.
experiences, right? So they're experiences that may extend through the physical world and into the digital world. And their idea is that consumers move fluidly back and forth, and we really need to be there servicing them and providing unique experiences across both worlds.
And if you haven't trademarked that word, you should quickly, if it's trademarkable, because that's you got to get on that. Get your attorneys on that one because it's worth it. All right, we're gonna run out of time. I think I'm gonna get. Are we out of time right now? Or do I have time for one more question?
You have time for one more question.
Okay, last question, Carole.
Okay.
What do I tell my family who are big believers and buyers? Is there going to be like room rugs and drapes, or are you guys going to stay closer to apparel? Like, is there any sort of hint on what you could see UGG doing in say 2 to 3 years? Like what little tidbit can you share? And let's not talk global. Let's just talk North America, because I know you've got a global brand. What should my family expect over the next 2 to 3 years from UGG?
I think we will continue to extend our heritage and this idea that UGG is a brand for both men and women.
Okay.
We started, a lot of our history started as this surf brand, right? Like we were, our founder was from Australia, and he was handing out the boots to surfers to keep their feet warm. And it really started as this brand that was for everybody.
Right.
And so I think you'll continue to see us leaning in on that idea that UGG is a brand for everybody. So continuing this idea of radical inclusivity and what that means across genders, what that means across capabilities of people, body sizes. So we will be extending that idea through product offerings, through services, and I think continuing to lean on that idea, and then continuing to innovate, right? Like we are not resting on our laurels. So even though I said we'll be leaning into our heritage and telling some of our brand history, we will also be innovating in a major way with new products and new, I would say, new services as well.
Well, if you need like any testers for the new products, Ashworths are fully on for that one. So I've got men and women in my household. So we're totally open if you need any product testing people. Carole, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciated the conversation, appreciated the fluidity of it, and good luck. You're on a fantastic brand with a great background. So good luck to you. And I'm looking forward to watching your journey with UGG and hopefully ridiculous success, because it certainly feels like you guys have the right plan for it. So thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you both, Carole and Eric, for being here today. Love hearing about the UGG brand. I'm sitting here in Switzerland, and it's definitely a popular brand here. Love seeing it, obviously, on ski slopes and out, people doing outdoor activities. It's just like, it's there, it's present. And thank you both just for being here today. And we look forward to having you both back.
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you.
Thank you.